Hi, can two female characters still be excluded when the male characters weren't even made into action figures? Somehow doubly so. Andrew, and this is Gayties Toys. On today's MIA 80s Ladies, we're talking about two characters from both a cartoon and a toy line that aren't terribly well known, so we're going to focus a little bit more in the history than usual. And I got some feelings on these two, so let's just get right into Jenny Gale and Siren from Ring Raiders. Ring Raiders was first conceived of by a small company called Those Guys from Cleveland. You might not recognize the name, but they are the ones who are the creators of Care Bears, Strawberry Shortcake, Get Along Gang, absolute juggernauts of merchandising. And they were really, more of an arm of American Greeting Card. When they decided to look around at sort of the boys market, they looked at Micro Machines, one of my personal favorites, and said, let's tap into that. And so what they did was sort of create a compatible line of airplanes. In this case, it would be, a tiny plane attached to a stick, which would attach to a ring on your finger to sort of simulate flying. There was a lot of accoutrements, a lot of, giant play sets. It was a quite expansive line, but a very short-lived one. While those guys from Cleveland were doing, what they do, and that is merchandise a brand out to the masses between, lunchboxes, bed sheets, cake pans, all of it. They did approach Deke Entertainment to go do the cartoon. If you had a toy line in the 80s, you also had to have a cartoon series to accompany it. And that's, if you weren't, you were just absolute trash, caca, no good, go home delicious. Although the toy line specifically focused on airplanes, those guys from Cleveland decided to sort of kind of give each plane a character, a very two-dimensional, almost vaguely Strawberry Shortcake style, character where they're like, this is the area you're from, this is the plane you like from the real world that you pilot, and let's just kind of create a very bare bones basic bio on that. For the 1989 cartoon, it seems they sort of just gave that over to Deke Entertainment and say, run with it, make this make sense. The actual story of the Ring Raiders is a bit complicated, almost like Visionary style, where there's too many cooks in the kitchen, it seems. The year is the distant future, 1998, but instead of getting jiggy with it, these people were facing a war between Skull Squadron, led by Scorch. Scorch had basically kidnapped some scientists, genetically engineered himself, plus his other, fearsome fighting foes in the skies, and then also used these scientists to create time travel for reasons. In response to Skull Squadron, Victor Vector would, found the Ring Raiders, and they would essentially, use their special rings. And with the whole, catchphrase of the entire toy line and cartoon would say, the command is in your hands, which, story of my life. With the ring, they would almost kind of telebond with their planes. They would merge man and machine into one thing and sort of plus up their planes. This would essentially, give it greater firepower, greater speed, whatever the plot really needed at that time. Unfortunately, the experience would also fry their nervous systems if they did it too long. So if you didn't unplug, you'd probably die. Fun. Also, because apparently time travel is easy, they also invented time travel, and this is really where a lot of the characters came from. They were almost the best pilots throughout history between, say, like World War I to present day. All these characters would essentially be, kind of almost throwbacks to a bygone era, but they were, the best of the best. So, time travel, at least in this regard, kind of made sense. Here's where we get to the ladies, and here's where I start to get a little pissy. There's two characters made specifically for the Deke cartoon. They did not appear in, the Bible made by those guys from Cleveland. They were not in the merchandise. They were not in the comics. They were only ever in the cartoon. We'll start with Siren, because there's not really a lot to say there. In the first episode, she's described as cruel when, Victor's kind of running through the Rose Galleries. I would say she's probably one of the more featured and more memorable of the villains cast. But she was kind of a green-blue skin because she was genetically engineered. She had a futuristic jet that fired sonic weapons. That's about it. There's not really much to talk about here. I got more of a beef with Jenny, however. Jenny Gale was seemingly, let's say, the second in command to Victor Vector. She was very high-ranking ring commander. She was, constantly being told that she's one of the best. She was really, in the first episode, one of the first we meet. In that episode, the character of Cub is recruited from the past and brought to the future. Jenny is the first one that he meets, and she immediately dresses him down. He, in turn, kind of flirts with her, and she says, thanks for reducing me to a piece of meat. This is where the problem starts. She was kind of a bitch. And not like that bitch, I mean just a bitch. Just this overwhelming, oppressive bitch character. And it's almost illustrated in the very second episode of the very short London series, where, we really kind of see why she's a bitch. So she was a young pilot, very gifted from a young age. She became a GI nurse during the Vietnam War, and then eventually sort of, took that and became a medevac pilot, very well celebrated during the Vietnam War, which, what a war it was. She was rescued from the past and plucked into the future of 1998, and decided to, become one of the Ring Raiders, but also go on to become a doctor. So she really did have a lot of, useful attributes, admirable skills in the future. However, some characters like Baron didn't want, women in combat. She, was kind of cut down by people. Even her medical orders were disobeyed. I mean, you felt like the writers wanted you to know she's this way because X number of, factors led to this. However, I have a problem with this. I mean, I'm always a fan of diversity of character. I mean, look, if she's going to be that bitch, fine. But at least make her, as the hero of the story, something else, a little more, than one-dimensional. So let's just take, for example, a well-known female action hero from the 80s, and that would be Teela from Masters of the Universe. I mean, she was very well-skilled, usually the first person that He-Man would kind of, call on to run into battle. So well-respected in that regard, but she was very young, very overconfident, very brash. So the skill made her a hero, but the faults made her human, and so you kind of need that blend of the two to be an aspirational hero, to be someone you want to root for. Jenny did not have that. Jenny felt more like the writers were hurt by someone, and they were kind of working out their feelings with this character. So we got a villainess with not much characteristics, and we got a character on the hero side who's a little grating. That's one problem. I think the real problem that really kind of sets me off in this whole journey is that, in the cartoon, a lot of the characters had a corresponding plan. Such is this the case in the case of the women, but because they were made for the TV show specifically, they didn't have planes that actually kind of, exist in nature. All these planes are generally from, World War I, Vietnam War, that kind of thing. So these were, in the toy line and also real world things. By the time Ring Raiders was done, they had up to 150 planes, and most were, real world, some were a little kind of futuristic made up, but with all of that to play with, they decided not to use any of those. I mean, and I'm not sure if that's on the mantra of those guys from Cleveland or Matchbox or Deke or what, but basically it was decided not to fem up any of the character planes in the line. So what happened is that these characters were created for the cartoon, as was convention at the time. You sort of include female characters to lure in little girl viewers, but then not give them a toy. But then you couldn't retroactively make them, the pilot of a ship that was on shelves, so they had to make up planes as well. So Siren got, again, this sort of futuristic jet. Jenny got this almost jet-powered helicopter that likewise does not exist. That thing was called the Nightingale, and could sort of, do anything the plot wanted. It's that kind of thing. This is where, this is of course a running theme throughout this entire series of videos, but I mean, that just feels like such an extra dig, and it just, this is one of my most hated subjects I've done in all these, months. So this final verdict is going to be pretty short, unsurprisingly, if you've been paying attention. I've long been in chat rooms, in message boards, in social media, YouTube, you name it. Anytime fans get together and say, here's the 80s line, we'd love to make a resurgence, Ring Raiders is not part of the conversation. And listen, if Ring Raiders is your brand, if it's your cartoon, your toy line, your ride or die, I gotta tell you, you've been pretty quiet these past couple of years. So before you sound off in the comments below saying, you're giving it no respect, maybe look inwards and wonder why no one's talking about it and wonder why it's never gonna make a comeback. And that's it for Ring Raiders. I unfortunately have the theme song from the cartoon stuck in my head for weeks now, but I never want to think about this again. So I thank you for watching, for liking, for commenting, subscribing, all those YouTube things. I will see you next time on MIA 80s Ladies, and Ring Raiders sucks! I'm out of here.